Welcome to the Anatomy of Inequity, a podcast that examines how systems, structures, and history shape health outcomes long before a patient enters the clinic. This podcast is designed for healthcare students and professionals who are willing to look beyond individual behavior and examine the conditions that produce unequal care, because outcomes aren't accidental and inequity has an anatomy.
As we move forward in this course, it's important to pause and reflect. In the beginning of this course, we examined health gaps and how education functions as a social determinant of health. This episode builds on that foundation, not by introducing new material, but by showing how those concepts live across generations. This story is personal, but it's also academic. It serves as a case example of how systems quietly shape outcomes long before clinical care begins. I will ask each guest on this podcast the same opening and closing questions. So here's me answering myself. What systems in your childhood most shaped what you believe was possible for you? Now, this podcast answers that question, so I won't formally answer it here, but I think you will get an understanding of what I mean as I explain my story. So let's first talk about the Great Migration and educational legacy. I am a product of the Great Migration. My paternal grandmother moved from Evergreen, Alabama, in the late 40s, early 50s to Chicago. And my mother moved with her sisters to Chicago in the 60s. Both my parents, even though they met at Grambling State University, did not get married until later on once they moved to Chicago. But they all moved here in search of opportunity, stability, and safety. My parents both became educators in the public school system. And in my family, education was not framed as optional. It was protective. It was a strategy. It was survival. In the 60s, there was not much mention of Black folk being able to become physical therapists or doctors. While they were there, and there were some that thrived, the majority were servants and maids and janitors. But again, let's talk about the survival. That legacy placed me in private schools and created expectations early. College was assumed. Access was intentional. So I'm not quite sure why my family decided or my parents decided for me to attend private school, but they did. I'm not sure if they were frustrated with the public school system and thought that their only daughter needed better. But I did end up going to private school for grammar school and high school. Academic grouping and testing when measurement causes harm. So again, in private school, doing exceptionally well, scoring very well on standardized tests, above and beyond what my peers were doing and what those expectations were. In 5th and 6th grade, my test scores revealed that I was reading at 11th and 12th grade. But access does not mean immunity. Academic grouping and standardized testing, systems designed to measure and support learning, often did the opposite for me. They didn't simply assess performance, they shaped my identity. So the little girl in 5th and 6th grade who was scoring well above her grade all of a sudden in 7th and 8th grade did not do as well. So being grouped early created fear before confidence. For some reason, my ability to excel on standardized testing plummeted as a result of me being grouped in 6th grade in an 8th grade reading group with lower performing students. I don't know why that triggered me, but it did. The academic grouping didn't simply assess my performance, but again, it shaped my identity. And in retrospect, I think about all of those students that were in that group with me and maybe how they even felt having a 6th grader in their 8th grade class, and maybe what the ramifications were or what the silent looks and gests were for me. These labels lingered. They followed me from being a student into adulthood, into licensure exams, certification processes, and professional confidence. If the educational system can shape how a child views their intelligence, it's not difficult to imagine how clinical labels shape how our patients experience care. DEI as a barrier removal, not an advantage. Later in my educational journey, DEI initiatives played a role in my access to physical therapy education. I mentioned that my test scores were not what they should be once I got to high school, nor my grades. I honestly feel like I just stopped trying. And don't get me wrong, my grades weren't awful. They just weren't what they used to be. That little girl that fought to be at the top of her class and everything was comfortable with being somewhere at the bottom of the highest tier. I don't feel like it was a shortcut. I don't feel like I was given privilege because of that. It wasn't a lower of standards, but as a recognition that structural barriers unrelated to ability still existed. So someone might say, well, I took someone else's place. And that may very well be the case. But at the end of the day, all of the barriers that I was dealing with, I still had to deal with. I got no shortcuts when it came to taking exams. I got no shortcuts when it came to taking practicals and things of that nature. All of my objectives were still the same. DEI didn't give me something I hadn't earned per se once I got to school, but it did help remove obstacles that maybe shouldn't have been there in the first place. Maybe I shouldn't have been the only African American student allowed into that course. Maybe there were some other ethnicities that should have been allowed as well. That distinction matters in healthcare education and practice. Geography, fragility, and my daughter's experience. So years later, when my family moved from Illinois to Indiana, I saw how quickly access could shift. Same child, different systems, different expectations. And while my child is 100 times more intelligent than I am, I did see the shift in the access to the things that she received educationally here in a different environment. It was a reminder that opportunity is fragile, zip codes matter, educational systems matter, and the differences ripple forward into stress, access, and long-term health outcomes. This is why education is a social determinant of health. Health disparities do not begin in the clinic. They begin in classrooms, testing rooms, neighborhoods, and policies. Understanding this is not optional for clinicians, it's foundational. So when I look back at my experience and maybe the gifts that I was given, I don't regret what I've gone through. I think that it has helped me become more aware of those people who may be walking in my same steps. DEI initiatives are not just for Black folk. They actually began for women in general. And I think that the DEI initiatives in this country, the things that are trying to be ripped from us, will take away some of those stepping stones, some of those access platforms that people in rural communities, people in urban communities, people that have not been given the privilege of the Great Migration, will now, those things will be removed because we have decided as a society that everybody doesn't deserve education that's equal. Everybody does not deserve health care that is equal. It's important for us as healthcare professionals to remember that we are only here for a short period of time, and we are here for a snippet of time. And what we do every day as clinicians, as professors, as educators, as people, it matters. It's not just about you. So I'll close this segment with the question that I plan to ask every guest on the show. How are you intentionally building a legacy that actively dismantles health inequities? Well, my answer is simple. I plan to stay planted in my ability to evoke change in those that are coming behind me, specifically in the area of physical therapy, but it goes beyond that. I'm ready to reach any healthcare professional, any person that is willing to listen to the fact that legacy matters. So I'm grateful for the migration. I realize that I inherited something great that many people could not experience because their close ancestors were not able to migrate here. And it's not to say that people aren't successful that stayed in the South. There just were different opportunities here, and my family decided to take up on those things. So I won't take anything for my journey. I just believe the blessing in being here and being able to shed light and make a light brighter for someone else is more important than whatever I've experienced, whatever pitfalls I've experienced. It's really about the next generation. It's really about the next Professor White that is coming behind me.
As you move forward in this course, remember this: health disparities are not simply about patients, they're about systems. And as future clinicians, you don't just treat bodies, you practice within structures that either reinforce inequity or interrupt it. Reflect on how this episode connects to student learning outcomes and how that understanding may influence your clinical perspective. This is The Anatomy of Inequity.